About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side, the real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. Anyway, I had been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you just suddenly become really tired out of nowhere? Well, yeah, that happened to me. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull up, and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass, behind some bushes, to try and hide my car from anybody else who was going to come past. The roads weren't empty. I came across another car every few minutes or so. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22 and then fell asleep. Sometime later I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rear view mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was the damn hook killer. You know, the one that scratched that couple's car and then slaughtered the guy when he got out to investigate. Fuck that, I thought to myself, so I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a fucking car parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door opened. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rear view mirror. I didn't see anything, and all of a sudden this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like, hey you, get the fuck out of your car, now. I noped the fuck out of there and sped off. I never saw the guy again. Moral of the story, don't fucking sleep on the side of a deserted road. A few summers ago, I went for a bike ride around midnight with a friend. We went our separate ways at the end of the evening, and I had about 2 blocks to ride back by myself. Because of construction, I had to ride on the sidewalk, but the streets were dead. But it wasn't a problem until right where I was about to turn left onto my street. There was this man walking by himself, maybe 40s, a little scruffy but not homeless. The sidewalk was narrow, and I didn't want to freak him out, so when I got about 6 feet behind him, I said, "Hey, behind you." And he turned around and gave me this super angry look. I turned down me street and he started to follow me, literally screaming about how I was a fucking cunt, and he was going to kill me and all that. I live right off the corner and I didn't want him to figure that out, so I decided to do another loop around the block. That's not the scary part. The scary part is that when I looped back around and looked down the street, I saw him standing on my fucking front stoop, staring out at the street like the motherfucker knew I lived there. He saw me ride by again, but he didn't say anything. I ended up going back to the friends, but my bike got stolen from the alleyway by the house 2 days later. Edit, the guy in question was definitely not actually homeless. We have a large population of mentally ill in that area, unfortunately, downtown of a medium-sized city. So if I didn't think the sidewalk was too narrow to pass otherwise, I wouldn't have disturbed him. Half the scary part was that he looked pretty much completely normal for my area. That being said, I ended up texting my mom, and she made the decision not to notify law enforcement until my bike was stolen. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young because my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course, I always end up sleeping on the couch because Nick at night made me tried. So one night I wake up to the prickly feeling, like an instinct, just bolted into a sitting position and stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees. In perfect light cast from the moon, I see a silhouette of someone in this fucking tree. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange person outside. Dad grabs something defensive and darts outside with the dogs to beat the wax off the hot head. I tremble in Mama's arms until Dad comes home and says he saw no one and to go to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bedroom. I fill in my sister in as to what happened. Dad is making regular rounds in the house with a cup of coffee. We're all still and I finally think I can sleep. Nope, I notice the man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me a shush signal and runs away. Just turns around to run a straight line away. I swear I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young because my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course, I always end up sleeping on the couch because Nick at night made me tried. So one night I wake up to the prickly feeling, like an instinct, just bolted into a sitting position and stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees. In perfect light cast from the moon, I see a silhouette of someone in this fucking tree. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange person outside. Dad grabs something defensive and darts outside with the dogs to beat the wax off the hot head. I tremble in Mama's arms until Dad comes home and says he saw no one and to go to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bedroom. I fill in my sister in as to what happened. Dad is making regular rounds in the house with a cup of coffee. We're all still and I finally think I can sleep. Nope, I notice the man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me a shush signal and runs away. Just turns around to run a straight line away. I swear I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours. I was 17 and had just gotten my license. Back in high school, my friends and I had made it a mission to find abandoned houses to throw parties in. We had a few good candidates, but the mother lode was this house I would pass on my home from work. It was an undeveloped shell of a huge home with a large property in the back. I had told one of my friends about it, and one day before we went to see a movie, I took him to the house. It was about dusk in summer, so I had my headlights on. I pulled into the front of the house, and we were there for like 10 seconds tops before we pulled back to go to the main road. A minute later, this big truck pulls up behind us with its high beams on and riding our ass. My friend and I took note of it, but paid it no mind as we headed back to the main road. At the light, I turned right, but the truck cut through the gas station at the corner and blocked us off. Out of the truck comes this big hulk of a man and my friend and I are shitting our pants. He raps on the window and I roll it down. Now, the really freaky part is that this a busy road and now there was no one in sight. He asks us what we were doing at the house and I quickly lied and said we were making a U-turn. He stares at us for a few seconds, smiles and sends us on our way. To this day, the house remains unfinished and I'm convinced it's a drug operation of some sort. TLDR, don't go into abandoned houses, man. This is not supernatural creepy, but is one of the more disturbing and surreal experiences of my life. One early morning a few short years ago, I am walking to my bus stop and eating a banana. It is dark, misty, around 5 a.m., and I am internally debating something trivial, like if I want my daily Starbucks before or after the commute. As I approach the dimly lit corner on my street, A tall man in a black mask steps out of the dark alleyway to my left. Sleepy and disoriented, I barely acknowledge him. When he shouts, "Put down your fucking purse," and points his gun to my head, things start to click. The man says, "Put down your bags," and I tell him, "Okay, okay, I'm putting them down over here." He orders me to walk over to him, toward the alley, and get down on the fucking ground, and I agree, I'm coming, okay, okay. My heart is beating a million miles a minute, and my hands still smell sticky with banana. I know I need to get away. I don't know why, but my mouth won't stop working. Look, see, I'm on the ground. My stuff is over there. Please just take my stuff, but he doesn't like it. Shut the fuck up, okay? He gets on top of me and puts the gun to my head. At this point, I should mention the fact that I'm on my way to coach a high school practice and I'm dressed like a dude. Huge baggy pants, hat, jacket. If not for my telltale voice, I'd look like a prepubescent 90s rap star. Anyway, as the guy gets on top of me, gun to my head, he looks at me and pauses. I can't tell you why I know this, but I swear that at this moment it clicks for him that I'm a woman. He gets off of me, stands up, and points to the dark alley. Come with me. My stomach hurts. I remember that there have been a recent rash of sexual assaults in my neighborhood, during the daytime no less. When the man points down that dirty alleyway, my internal voice speaks the fuck up. Says voice one, "There was no way in hell you're going to go down there without a fight." "But he has a gun, you dipshit," replies voice two. "Follow me," the real voice, his voice, hollers. So I do what I do best, I talk. "I'm coming, I'm following you," I call. And the man makes a crucial mistake, he believes me. I take 1, 2 tiny steps backwards toward the sidewalk, and he turns his body and his gun toward the alley. This is my moment. I take a deep breath, tuck my head down in case he starts shooting, and start sprinting away. I hear a voice screaming in a high-pitched wail before I realize that it's mine. After running 6 or 7 blocks, I head back to my apartment, hoping he's not there to see where I lived. The police check out the alleyway an hour later, but the potential attacker is long gone. The only evidence of the encounter is my banana peel browning in the alleyway and the adrenaline rush that I couldn't shake for days. I would be lying if I said that if that experience doesn't bother me still. But I'm so fortunate to mainly be haunted by the what-ifs and not the what-dids. My CPR certification. I had to try and perform CPR on a woman dying of a heroin, probably other drugs too, overdose. I was at a thrift store with some friends looking for Halloween costumes, and someone came in saying that someone was passed out in the parking lot. I was in the dressing room, and it just got super quiet. So I came out and told them I was certified and I'd go take a look, and that they needed to call 911. I go outside and don't see anyone on the ground. Someone comes out and shouts that the person is in the car that's parked far out by itself. I ran over and honestly freaked the fuck out. She was pretty much already dead, completely blue in the face, slumped against her car window. She had the red druggy rings around her eyes, but those were blue too because she was so oxygen deprived. We opened the door, and I'll never forget that when we turned her head to see if she still had a pulse, she had tears running down her face. We pulled her out of the car, put her on the ground, and took her pulse again because the first person to do it wasn't sure. We started CPR and the ambulance arrived about a minute after. They got her strapped up and in and continued CPR. They had another ambulance come, and those EMTs got out, and there was literally like 6 of them surrounding her. The cop told us they had administered some type of drug that can apparently reverse heroin overdoses if given in time, but she was pretty much dead already. They would do the necessary stuff until they could get to the hospital and call it, according to him. I also remember when we opened the door, there was heroin needles and empty pill bottles all over the floor. She wasn't very old. We also think she had kids. She had some toys and a car seat, plus 2 names tattooed on her. Edit, wow. Thank you guys so much for the responses and the gold. It was definitely a rough situation, but for being 19 at the time, I think I handled it well. TL doctor, almost abducted by five guys in a super shady part of town really late one night, saved by hero comedian. Back in 2004, I was a young, dumb 17-year-old country girl in the city for the first time for college. One night I decided I could totally safely walk back to my dorm at around 1:30 in the morning despite not really knowing where I was. Of course, I instantly end up wandering around a terrible part of the city. Most of the streetlights are busted out, trash everywhere, loud arguments from inside the dilapidated as fuck row houses. In short, I wouldn't even want to be here in the middle of the day. A car drives up behind me and slows down so they're keeping pace with me for nearly an entire block. I look over and there are five unsavory-looking men inside. By this point, I was approaching an intersection, and they pull up, make a left, and stop in the street directly in my path. I completely panic at this point and just stand there, right in front of them. My mind went completely blank. I've never been that scared in my life. It didn't even make sense to try to run because they would have caught me without question. I'm not really sure how long I stood there, but suddenly the porch light in the house just past the car came on. Dude casually strolls outside carrying a bag of trash, and car peels away. I completely break down crying and shaking. Dude spots me and listens to my probably incoherent story, takes me inside and gives me a soda. Then he and his roommate walk me back to my dorm. They were both lovely and invited me to check out their stand-up sometime, but unfortunately I was too young to get into a bar. I never saw them again, don't even remember their names, but feel pretty confident that if that guy hadn't decided to take his trash out at 1 a.m. on a Saturday, my life would have taken a really shitty turn that night. Edit, I completely accept that this was totally my fault and a horribly dumb thing to do. I was extremely fortunate and am no longer that stupid. My mother told me this not too long ago, but it happened about 10 years ago now. When my cousin was 17, 18 years old, she was in a car crash and had died a couple of weeks later in hospital. She was really close to my dad's sister, our aunt, and used to babysit her kids, who were no more older than 4 years old, all the time. Our aunt's house was under construction just before she passed away, and it continued on after she passed away. One day, my aunt got a phone call while she was at work from one of the construction workers, complaining about a teenage girl who keeps showing up at the house and walking around, and that she shows up a number of times during the weeks, and it has been happening for a couple of weeks. My aunt asks for a description of the girl to see if she knows her from around the neighborhood, and sure enough the description perfectly matches my cousin, who died a few weeks before. Long brown hair, red baseball cap, denim dungarees, and a white jacket. When my aunt got home, she showed them a picture of my cousin, and that all agreed that it was the girl they seen walking around the site. This story really freaked me out when I heard it because our family was never one to believe in anything paranormal or have anything of the paranormal sort happen to them before. When I was in high school, I had a really good friend who lived next door to a house that was always up for sale. People would move out in the middle of the night without a word, and it hadn't had the same owner for more than 6 months straight for a couple of years. One night we were really bored, and he suggested we go explore the house next door since it had sat empty for a while. We go around back and there's a dog door that he can crawl through, and he unlocks the door and lets me in. The house itself is really unremarkable. It looked like it was built in maybe the 1950s and was a craftsman-style house in an older, nicer part of town. My friend's house was similarly built. The kitchen had a really nice built-in breakfast table set against a picture window. The house's electricity was off, but you could see the street light through the window. My friend and I sit down on the floor across from this table and are just hanging out talking. Why? Who knows? All of a sudden my friend screams, and in that instant my vision goes black. But it wasn't that I just couldn't see. My body was engulfed in this sickly coldness from head to toe. I start screaming and I feel my friend's hand grabbing mine and pulling me in some direction forcefully. My vision slowly comes back and I start to warm up when I realize that we're outside under the street light. It was December and should have been much warmer inside of that house. Finally, I look at my friend and he looks scared. I'm really confused and kind of panic myself and finally ask him what happened. He says that as I was talking, a black thing, this figure that was all black and only had the vague shape of a girl, crawled out from under the table and sat on top of me. Apparently, I started groping around with my eyes wide open, like I couldn't see, and he was so freaked out he pulled me out of the house. We're still friends and we bring it up every now and then, but the story itself never changes and it still sends chills down my spine. To this day, I've never felt such blackness or coldness in my life. It was palpable, almost sticky. For a couple of days afterward, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling, and I could never walk past that house again. I'm scared to get out of bed now. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. It starts at one side of the room, casually walks to the other and stops. This will happen maybe twice a night. I didn't start hearing it until I was about 14, when my grandparents made me start sleeping in a different room on the first floor because they starting sleeping in separate bedrooms. Blah blah blah. Regardless, both of their rooms are also on the first floor. For a little backstory, I have always been afraid of the upstairs at their house. I don't know why, but it's always freaked me out, and I refuse to ever go up there alone. I'm 23 now, still won't go up alone. There's one room specifically, though. It's a long, narrow bedroom. When you open the door, there are closets on your left and right, a bed placed roughly in the middle of the room, and a window on the far side opposite the door. I was told growing up by my grandparents that the sons of the previous owner claimed to see a gorilla come out of the closet at night, dance around the room, and go back into the closet. I thought nothing of this story until I had to start sleeping in the other room, the room located directly below the scary room upstairs. So we all go to bed. All the lights in the house are off and I'm still awake, lying on the bed. Then I heard it thump, 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 starting at one end of the room upstairs. It got closer to me, passed right above me, and continued to the end of the room where it stopped. I'm wide awake, terrified out of my mind. It was no question to me that I had heard footsteps. I knew that slow, casual pace. I was freaked out and went to my grandpa's room. I told him what I heard. He told me that the house is old and it creaks. But he turned the dining room light on for me, so I felt a little safer. I tried going back to sleep. Then it started again, this time from where it ended the first time, by the window upstairs. It walks over me again and stops when it reached the door. I thought it was over until 5 seconds later when I heard it coming down the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Silence as it reached the landing. Then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And silence again as it reached the first floor. I was frozen in shock. Whatever it was on my floor of the house and sadly unaffected by the dining room light. I was staring at the doorway to my room. The dining room light was shining in, and my vision began to distort. I felt dizzy with fear, so I pulled the blankets over my head and suddenly heard a scratching sound from inside my room. I knew exactly where it was coming from too, my grandpa's gun case. It was a very obvious sound, scratching on the wood. Long scratches down the front of the gun case door. I could even hear the door ever so slightly tapping against the frame as each scratch began. I tried to scream and I couldn't. I took a second to take a deep breath and let out a loud scream. In seconds, my grandpa had made it to my room and I was relieved. Needless to say, he still didn't believe me, so I did what any normal person would do. I draped a sheet over the side of the bed and slept underneath it. I wrapped myself tight in a comforter, put on headphones, and turned my back to the door. There could be a party of ghosts in my room and I wouldn't even know. The next morning, my grandpa told my grandma about what happened the night before. She said, "Oh, that's silly. You know, your cousin woke me up the last time she stayed here. She came in my room saying, 'I hear footsteps.' I slept under the bed for the rest of my week's stay with them." I've stayed there countless times since that happened, and I hear the footsteps every time. I sleep on top of the bed now, but keep my back to the door and sleep with headphones on. I haven't heard it come down the stairs since that first night. But if it does, I don't want to know. When I was about 7, my two brothers and I were playing in an area that was used as an unofficial motocross place. We decided to dig a tunnel for some reason, being the extra smart guys we were. It took a few hours to dig about 6 ft in and 2 feet high. I was right up at the face when suddenly the tunnel collapsed. It was all dirt with no supports. My world went instantly black and hot. By hot, I mean furnace hot. I couldn't move a muscle from the weight of the soil completely enclosing me. I started to really panic, as you do. Everything started turning red, which I guess was blood being forced into my head. Every breath was getting harder as the soil constrained me more and more. Even though my hands were near my face, I couldn't move my arms to clear the dirt around my head, and also started breathing in dirt, which made me cough, which made me contract my stomach, and then I couldn't draw breath at all. This isn't what made me panic, though. The total darkness turning red with the incredible heat made my young mind think I was going to hell. I don't know how long I was buried for, but it seemed like an eternity. Suddenly, I felt something grab one of my feet. My brothers had been frantically digging through the collapse to pull me out and managed to reach me and then pull me out. We never told my parents. I just went home and got hosed down. TLDR got buried alive and pissed myself. Okay, this is 100% true. I'm 23 now and this happened about 10 years ago, so I was probably 13 or 14. Anyway, I used to skate board all the time with my friends Tim and Brandon. One day, we got done skating and we decided to go to 7-Eleven to get some food drinks before we went home. Remember, I was only 13, 14, so we weren't driving. We had skated to the 7-Eleven and were planning on skating walking back home. Anyway, we buy our drinks and we left the store. We walked to the parking lot's exit and prepared to cross the highway. It's not a bus highway since it's a small town. While we waited for the traffic light to turn red so that we could cross, I looked behind me at the 7-Eleven gas pumps. I noticed a 40-50-year-old man pumping gas into his white truck. He stared at me and before I knew it, he dropped the gas pump and jumped into his truck. He slammed on the gas and sped straight at my friends and he missed us, but he grazed my arm and knocked my skateboard out of my hand. My friend Brandon screamed, "WTF, you fucking dick," as the man peeled out and sped into the parking lot next to 7-Eleven. I swear to God, he drove through a ditch, which was between 7-Eleven's parking lot and the parking lot he was in, and tried to run us over again. This is where it got bad. The three of us started running at full speed, across the highway and toward the local library, which is like 2-3 blocks from 7-Eleven. When we were about 1-2 a block away, I looked back and saw the maniac speeding toward us, full of rage. Brandon and Tim ran up to the library doors and I ran towards the woods. It was Sunday, so I knew the library was closed, and there was a trail in the woods which led to my backyard. Meanwhile, this maniac peeled into the parking lot and hopped out of his truck. I looked behind me before escaping into the woods and saw him grab either a shotgun or a crowbar. I was pretty far away at this point, and I was freaking out, so my vision wasn't great from the bed of his truck. I ran all the way home. When I got to my street, my neighbor, Tim's dad, told me to get in his car because we had to go to the video store, which is where Tim's mom worked. When I got there, I found Tim and Brandon. They ran to the video store after realizing that the library was closed, and 3 cops. A minute later, my mom came in, crying her eyes out because Brandon and Tim told her they didn't know if I lived or not. Everyone had thought that I was captured. Tim told me that he saw the guy running after me into the woods, which is scary because I thought the maniac was chasing THEM, not me. Anyway, he was never caught. And I spent the next 5 years worrying about every white truck I saw. Edit, I forgot the most scary part. My town is small, but it's not empty. There were plenty of people around while this was going on. I felt so helpless, running for my life, while there were at least 100 people around not doing a thing about it. Also, to be clear, we didn't provoke this man at all. He tried to hit us for no reason, and that's creepy. Brandon called him a dick, but that was after he tried to run us over. We were good kids trying to walk home, and we almost died, got seriously hurt because of it. Also, bust highway equals busy highway asterisk. I lived in a bizarre little house as a child. It was incredibly tall and thin, like an attached house except freestanding, with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. It was full of quirks, such as 2 fully functional fireplaces, a shower stall in the center of the basement, a backyard so small that you could not take 5 paces without hitting the fence, and an old-timey rope-pull dumbwaiter that led from the kitchen to my bedroom. I loved that weird little place, but unfortunately it was incredibly old, and half of its charm was the fact that it seemed to have been designed by an inarticulate conclave of lunatics. And eventually, the repair costs exceeded what my parents were willing to sink into it, and we had to move. Preparing for the move was a chore. I packed most of my stuff myself, and I had taken to throwing stuff down the dumbwaiter and shoving all my clothes so thickly in my closet that they became a single, solid brick of fabric. While clearing that closet out, in fact, I came across a feature I hadn't noticed before: an attic entrance in the roof. Being an adventurous kid, I opened her up, stood on the clothes brick, and began my first and last exploration into the topmost part of our weird little house. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't as dark as it should have been. The place was strung with old, red Christmas lights which still burned with leftover incandescents, and a dozen little cracks and holes peeped down into all the bedrooms below. The second thing I noticed was that the place was set up for habitation. The insulation was plasticed away. There was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets, and a rusted mint green refrigerator which still worked when I tested it. The third thing was the bones. There were a lot of bones. I was a kid at the time, with a limited understanding of anatomy, but there were bones of all types heaped into a series of piles around the center of the attic. Small and large, clean and white, from every and any imaginable sort of creature, haphazardly stacked in a half-dozen osseous clumps. 2 of them were blackened, as if someone had tried to burn them, and the walls nearest those blackened piles were scrawled in dark bone-char messages. Mostly they were just smears, but the word sorry appeared more than once. That room had been sitting over my head for 8 years while I slept. So my uncle used to work a lot when I was younger. He's done a lot of different things to make money, but one consistent thing is that in the summer months and into late fall he paints houses. It's a legitimate business and everything. He's got a truck with a number and a name and supplies in the back, the works. Every now and then he would call my dad when he needed a little extra help and I'd work for him. No big deal really, it's just painting houses. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it takes a while to paint a whole house. If the weather conditions aren't right, then you can't paint. One particular fall was extremely wet. It rained what felt like every single day. My uncle would paint multiple houses at a time, so sometimes he would get caught up due to situations like these, and I'd work a little more than usual. That was fine by me, though. The job wasn't hard and it paid well. Anyway, it was a warm day for late fall, but there was still a distinct chill in the air. One that kinda penetrated through you and stung your soul. My uncle had this job he had to finish. It was an old Victorian house in a quiet part of town. A lady and her husband, who was an author, lived there. Due to the weather, it had taken longer than expected to paint the house, and there were family issues going on at the time, which further complicated things. So, my uncle gets a call one day from the lady who lives at the house. She says that her husband is trying to write his next book, but he keeps getting distracted by the scaffolding outside the house, so she wanted to know if we could come over and finish the job as soon as possible. My uncle was always an honest businessman. They had contracted him to do the job in midsummer, but he had lots of jobs that summer, and the wet conditions I mentioned above made it difficult to finish anything. However, these people were insistent but really polite, and not wanting to lose customers or get a bad recommendation, my uncle decided to put the house as a high priority. After all, it would only take a day or two to finish. So we show up to this house mid-afternoon. Like I said, it was a weird kind of chilly that day, and I also remember a really eerie calm. The day was slightly overcast, so everything was shrouded in gray. It was like the perfect setting for a mystery crime novel. So we arrive at this house and my uncle and I move to the back. The front of the house was already done, so there was nothing left there. My uncle, being the more experienced painter, would always do the touch-ups, and I would simply apply the first coats since they took little skill. Anyway, we get to the back of the house and he asks me if I'm scared of heights. I was 17 at the time, and although they do creep me out a little, I didn't want to seem like a child in front of my uncle, so I told him I wasn't. He was happy to hear that. He has me climb up the scaffold to the third floor to finish an upper section of the house. There was a window up there, a small little oval one that looked into the attic. The attic also happened to be the husband's study. He would do most of his writing in there. So I'm climbing up the scaffolding, cans of paint dangling behind me, and various paint brushes and other tools in the utility belt my uncle let me borrow. I get to the top of the scaffolding and set all my supplies down. I crack open a can of paint and start painting like I had a few hundred times before. Outside of the temperature, the overcast, and the eerie calm this day was like any other. I'm working my way across the top part of the house when I get to the window that looks into the study. I bend down, dip my paint brush, and stand back up to paint above the window. The window was in my direct line of sight and I couldn't help gazing in. I see a man, the husband, staring back at me with a face completely barren of any emotion. I had never seen a face so devoid of feeling before. I still haven't. Of course, I get startled and take a step back. I chuckle and smile at the guy, but he doesn't smile back. Instead, while remaining completely emotionless, he draws a pistol up to his head that he was holding in his hand the whole time and proceeds to blow his brains out, without ever breaking eye contact, right in front of me, while I'm staring at him. In utter shock, I gasp and let out the smallest scream as I step back in fear. Only, I stepped back a step too much and fell off the scaffolding. Alerted by the gunshot, my uncle looked up in just enough time to see me fall off the scaffolding from the third story. I was lucky enough to land in a bush and only suffer a broken ankle and a few scratches. The biggest wounds happened in my head. I had to go to counseling for a while. It's been years since then, and I still remember that man's face. I've never forgotten it. It will always be burned in the back of my head. I know why, looking back. His face was so devoid of emotion, because he never felt any emotion at all. He literally didn't care about what he was doing. As it turns out, the man was seriously depressed and facing marital issues with his wife. Combined with a few too many nights drunk on whiskey and facing writer's block, I guess he decided he couldn't take it anymore. His wife moved out of the house shortly after and we never finished the job. To this day that house remains abandoned, and to this day I try not to drive down the street it's on. I'm scared that if I do and happen to pass the backyard, I'll see that man staring back at me from that window, cold and emotionless. Fixed. It was around last year. We had a friend that went missing for almost a week. We weren't really that close, and he lives in a campus dorm, so I really didn't know till that night. My housemates saw a report from the university's FB page that there were a couple of bodies found in a spring at the far edge of the campus. Our university is located beside a mountain. We all started to worry, especially when I learned that he really had been missing. We were anxious for news to come, and when the reports of the initial ID came in, we were shocked. He was one of them. The report misspelled his last name, but we knew it was him. Panic mode. My housemates and I went out to meet with his dorm mates, while I called a couple of our friends that went straight to the springs. They weren't able to see him there since when they got there, the police already took the bodies for autopsy. At that point, we couldn't do anything but wait for further news. It turns out that the two of them went swimming there the weekend before and drowned. Their bodies got really bloated from being soaked for days, and crustaceans started to eat away their skins. It really seemed at first that it was a frat initiation gone bad, because they both looked like they were covered in lashes. It's a very cruel way to die. Sorry for the length of this, but it was spooky enough of an experience for me to write it. While I was deployed in Kosovo, my team did a lot of night missions that required us to cover a great deal of ground in a short period of time in order to make our extractions, all of it while remaining undetected by anyone in the areas that we would pass through. We would always seem to see odd things during the night, but nothing like this. During one of our recon missions, we had started by getting dropped off in a remote location to identify whether shipments of mortar rounds and mines were being moved through the area. Our extract was going to be before daybreak, and we needed to make it just over 17 kilometers. The terrain wasn't too overgrown and we had good intel over the area, and it was either a full moon or close to it. Of course it would be for this story. So, unless we encountered somebody, this was going to be an easy night. Our team was normally only 4 men, but we had the opportunity to make this a good training run for some of the new guys, and we took on an extra 3. We still wanted to make sure we played it safe though, so I took rear security and we'll call him L. Took the position just in front of me. We both worked great together and could easily manage to cover our team if needed. We moved about 10K through our mission area without finding anything, and had made good time doing it. At this point, we needed to start heading for our extraction point, which was located over a good-sized hill and then through an area that was near a village but not too close. We regrouped, did a count of people, ammo, and supplies, and moved out. Being rear security, I was the last to move, and just as I was about to take off, I heard a noise in the trees maybe 50 meters off. I turned and saw L looking at the direction as well. He had heard it too. Everyone else was still moving, since the new guys were in the middle and were not used to looking back every 20 m to spot your security. We were getting left. Chances were that the noise was nothing more than a deer, but L and I started moving out, using a 2-man bounding technique. We kept hearing a noise, so I told L to reach the team, while I remained in place after our next bound. I found a place with cover and he bolted after the team. I heard the noise again, and then saw trees move about 15 m in front of me. Everything stopped. 2 minutes went by with me being very quiet, controlling my breathing and watching my front and sides. L and my team were slowly making their way to engage whatever had been following us. They came up on the sides and surrounded the area I signaled to. Once in position, I moved up. Nothing, not footprints, tracks, or any sign that something had been there. Cue the guys giving L, and I a hard time for getting left alone and scared, good-hearted fun of course. We move out again. Again I am the last to move with L between myself and the next man to the front. This time no noises when I step away. After about 2K we come up to an orchard that we need to move through. The light from the moon was really bright and the trees were spaced, so we used them for cover as we stayed near the middle of the orchard. Just before I enter, I hear the noise again. This time, I thought I heard a little girl giggling. Not something that my imagination would make up on its own. I was expecting wildlife, if anything. This time, L had taken off an additional 20 m and turned to wait for me. I moved to my location and he moved out again. I was crouched next to a tree watching for anything. All of a sudden, the tree I was next to caught my attention. In the knots on the tree, I could see a face that looked like a person. As I squinted and looked more closely, a little girl's face appears and she turns at me smiling, waving a little hand and giggles, not maliciously, then disappears back into the tree. I am in absolute shock at this point, and there is not a chance in hell that I am going back to my team to report what I just saw. So instead, I bolt and catch up to L and keep my mouth shut. Recognizing that I likely have lost my mind, I am not going to talk about anything. We hit our extract and leave. 2 weeks go by, and I am told that I am needed to provide security for a team of combat engineers who are going through an area I am familiar with. In the meantime, my team was going to be going through the area we were in 2 weeks ago where L and I got scared, everyone laughing. Again, I never said a word to anyone about what I saw. In my mind, I am quite happy about not going back there. So I go out with the engineers and help them find a minefield that had been recently laid in an area that kids walk through every day, and they take care of informing the village nearby while starting to blow the mines in place. I really appreciate the engineers and the work they did out there. I get back and am taken to see my commander and told thanks for the work. Feeling great, I head back to my barracks room, a place I rarely get to visit, and see that none of the guys are back yet. No sooner than taking my boots off, the door opens and I hear everyone laughing as they enter. L is not laughing and telling everyone to screw themselves. One of the other guys sees me and blurts out, "Hey man, L says he isn't going on patrol with us anymore in your favorite spot." I just grimace and wait for stuff to calm down. A couple of days later, L and I are out playing babysitter to some scouts. He says, "What did you see that night?" I shrug and say, "I don't know. Just my imagination getting the better of me." He then says something that sends chills up my spine. "I know you saw her. I saw her too. Tell me I am not crazy." I felt numb and just said, "You're not crazy. Where did you see her?" He said, "Inside a tree." I had never given any information to L about what I saw or details that could have led for him to come up with the same conclusion. When I saw the girl in the tree, L was 40 m away from my location and could not have even seen me looking at the tree. I was running my cable route in the inner city. Between jobs, I realized I had to shit. Now, unfortunately, the nearest Quick Trip is like 5 miles away, light years in city travel, so I gamble and hit the nearest gas station. I get there and of course there's a line to the one unisex bathroom. A dude, a chick and myself are hanging around making small talk, but mentally I am an absolute shit-squeezing wreck. After about 5 minutes, the dude goes into full-on rage panic and starts trying to rip the door open, making the most demonic screeches. The woman in the bathroom is freaking out. The chick next to me is freaking out, and just as I step in to give him a WTF bro, it was like he got hit with a jolt of electricity and fell. Luckily I caught him, but at this point I realize he's having a seizure. I cannot describe the feeling I felt looking into this gentleman's eyes, crying blood, foaming at the mouth, and flailing about that I was just having a conversation with. The elderly woman in the restroom happens to be a retired nurse, go figure, and promptly instructs bystanders, and I how to handle the situation, and the paramedics arrive towards the end of his fit. Turns out his alcoholism was linked with his epilepsy or some shit, and he was waiting in line to sneak a swig of the flask in his coat pocket. Info from his wife, never would have expected it. Dude seemed cool as fuck, well dressed and groomed, all that jazz. The ordeal ends and I tell the woman it's her turn to use the restroom, to which she declines from being freaked the fuck out. I however drop the most contemplated and beautiful deuce in the dirtiest bathroom of the metro area. Maybe it's not that scary, but seizures scare the brother-loving piss out of me, and I think some people's personal lives are too much for me. This is one of two insane instances where I happen to be in the wrong place at the right time due to minor unusual route delays. We were living with my grandparents at the time. In my aunt's room was a 2-foot-tall Victorian-style doll converted into a lamp. The lamp would only turn on by holding the doll's cold plastic hand and raising and lowering the arm. The doll stood on a nightstand next to my aunt's bed, facing the door, greeting everyone who entered with a creepy dead-eye smile. I was alone in the house one day and wanted a blanket from my aunt's closet. Luckily for this scaredy cat, there were two important factors that worked in my favor. 1. It was mid-afternoon and wouldn't need the lamp's light. And 2. The closet was located immediately next to the door's entrance. So without lifting my gaze, I stared at the floor, entered the room, and turned 180 degrees. Now my back was towards the doll. I quickly swung open the closet door and reached down for a blanket when suddenly something about the room was different, brighter. The light was on, and the peach fuzz hairs on the back of my neck uncurled. I froze for an eternity, then felt my survival instinct kick in and wanted to run screaming in horror. But before all that, I still had to look. Man, I wish I hadn't looked. As I turned to exit the room, I lifted my stupid head, only to confirm that the doll's hand was raised, and that it was pointed directly at me. Such traumatizing vision burned in my brain since I was 13. About 4 years ago, I woke up one late morning on a day off at 10:21. You'll learn why I remember this 4 years later in a second. I got out of bed, used the restroom, got dressed, etc. I went back into my room and picked up my phone to check for messages, and the clock in the phone said 10:25. I was surprised, because I know that it did not take me only 4 minutes to dress. I'd lingered in the warm bathroom quite a while and brushed my teeth too, etc. I looked at my bedroom alarm clock to confirm, since that was the clock I'd looked at when I woke up. It also said 10:25. I shrugged it off and figured in my sleepy, just woke up state, I'd misread the original 10:21. I went downstairs, turned on the PC, turned on the news on the TV to listen to, and started cooking breakfast. I wanted microwave up some rice leftovers from last night, so I went to pop them in the microwave. The time on the microwave was 10:25. I whipped out my phone to check the time. It still said 10:25. There was no way. There was no way that I checked the clock upstairs, walked downstairs, turned on the PC and the TV, got a glass of water, and started cooking eggs in the matter of less than a minute. I decided to stand there and watch the microwave clock while counting to 60. I figured if it didn't turn to 10:26 in 60 seconds of less, clearly it was malfunctioning. It turned to 10:26 about 20 seconds into my count, which made sense. It had been 10:25 for a while before I looked. I finished making my breakfast, plated it up, and took it over to the PC like the lonely slob I am. The time on the PC said 10:20. I pulled out my phone. My phone also said 10:20. That's when I started writing all this shit down. I pulled up the little clock toolbar and watched the second hand go around. While I watched it, time seemed to pass normally. It ticked to 10:21 and 10:22 as I watched the second hand go around. Over the next what felt like an hour or so, maybe hour and a half, all the clocks in my house, as well as internet ones, seemed to pass time normally while I observed them. But if I looked away for a while, at least 2 minutes or so, they'd make no sense. At one point about 15 minutes after these events, the cell phone and PC read 10:14. Then later 10:13. Then back into the 10:20s. After the hour and a half, they normalized, and I've never experienced it since. TL Doctor, one day all my clocks went insane. Late to the show, but last December, a little before Christmas, my friend and I were driving home after our final exam. There's a red light at a major intersection up ahead, and I begin to slow down. I came to a complete stop in the right sidewalk lane of a 4-lane street, two each direction, facing southbound with 6 cars in front of me, and I'm stopped with a side street to my right. Suddenly, I hear tires screeching and a crash. I got hit rear right of my car by another driver. We get out, exchange information, and begin to take pictures of our respective vehicles. I look up the street to make sure I have a few hundred meters between myself and any vehicles approaching from the north before I step into the left southbound lane, so I can get a picture showing the angle of both of our cars and the street signs, which are rear right northwest intersection of the side street. My friend calls me over to unlock the trunk so he can get paper from his pack to write down his witness statement. And just as I step back into the right lane my car occupies, a northbound driver who was so occupied with observing our collision drifts into the left southbound lane, which I just stood in, and missed me by about a foot. He was traveling probably about 70 km/h. That's tilde 43 mph. 2 days later, I go paintballing with aforementioned friend and a few others. In between games, you go into the lobby with your mask off, and everyone is supposed to put their paintball marker, gun, on safe, and have a barrel cover over the muzzle. I'm leaning against a wall in the lobby when previous friend asks if he can borrow money to buy more paint. My back is still leaning against the wall, but I lean to the right to hand him my wallet. As I put it in his hand, I hear a loud splat against the wall I'm on. I look to find a paintball fired at where my head eyes should have been had I not moved. Somehow one of the kids across the room was putting his marker down on a table, and the barrel cover's retention bungee snapped, allowing the cover to fall off. The safety broke, and the marker fired a round. A paintball to the eye at 250 FPS could have been a game changer, to say the least. 2 days later, I'm out drinking with the friends I went paintball with and some others. We're walking down a major street and I'm naturally a fast walker, so every 25 meters I'm stopping, turning back and waiting for everyone to catch up. At one point, I look back and see everyone is still pretty far back, but it's cold and we're practically at our destination, so instead of stopping to wait I decide to just keep walking ahead. Then for some reason I decide to stop and shout back to them I'll meet them inside. Just as I do so, I hear a loud engine roaring up the street and turn to see a speeding Porsche 10M in front of me hit the west wall of a building literally at a right angle so hard that more than half of his engine compartment caved in. His airbags deployed, and the windows all shattered. Had I kept walking without saying anything to my friends, I probably would have been between the car and the building. 2 days later, it's Boxing Day morning. I was in and out a few times throughout the night because I was excited to go pick up some items with my friend, the same one from the collision paintball night out. At one point through the night, I have a nightmare of the sorts. The earliest part of the dream I can remember is me leaping out of a panel door van with a rope in my hand. I have no idea why, but in the dream my mind knows that someone is trying to kill me. As my feet hit the ground, I find myself in my driveway. I run inside the house and for some reason tie the rope to the front door's doorknob, knowing that on the other end of the rope is the killer tied to it. I lock and barricade all of the doors and windows to the house and call 911. The operator tells me every officer is busy with something and no one can come help me. I hang up the phone and am about to call the someone else when I notice the rope has been cut. Trying to stay silent and listen for the killer, I suddenly notice everything that can possibly make sound in the house is jiven. Kettle, stove fan, toilet, shower, TV, radio, everything. I look up at the top of the stairs and see someone's foot hit the first step and start walking downstairs. I wake up screaming and sweating, and the first words out of my mouth before I can even think to process it as a dream are, Slender Man. TLDR. Almost died 3 times IRL and had a dream Slender Man was trying to kill me all in 1 week. Edit words. A friend of mine and I were driving home from high school one afternoon when we came to a red light at a main intersection. The left turn light turns green and my friend accelerates, maybe a bit too quickly. His tires peeled out a little bit. Suddenly, the green pickup truck that was behind us speeds up next to us on our left, and the driver is a scary-looking bald man that is clearly yelling at us, even though the window is rolled up. We unfortunately get to another red light, and I alert my friend as the truck driver pulls up right next to us again at the light, left side this time. The driver motions us to roll down our window, and we try to decline as politely as possible. That's when he makes a gun with his hand and points it at us, and then points it at his head and pulls the trigger. He starts making moves toward his glove box and the light turns green. We both just look at each other with looks of terror, and my friend guns it as we both scream. The truck peels out towards us and is tailing us, right on our ass. I decide the best thing to do is to try and lose him near my house in my neighborhood. I'm familiar with the area, and if we get ahead of him enough, we can pull into a cul-de-sac before he spots us. Sure enough, he is following us the whole time, and as we pull into my neighborhood, I tell my friend to speed up quickly and pull a left into a subdivision. It worked. We speed down until we find a busy-looking cul-de-sac and park behind a car on a driveway. We lay low and eventually see the truck drive by, right by the street we chose to hide in. Huge sigh of relief. At that point, we decided to just chill out and try to laugh about it. We don't know what could have happened. We ended up calling the police and meeting up with an officer to make sure we could get home safe. Never saw the fucker again. TLDR for no reason apparently. Some crazy driver motioned to shoot me and my friend in the head and chased us around my hometown. I found a way to lose him and eventually escaped. I have a fear of spiders because of a hunting trip I took with my dad and family when I was a kid. I don't enjoy shooting things. Not an animal rights activist, but I think killing for game or bragging rights and not for food is wasteful and barbaric. I had brought my Game Boy, and they stationed me at one of the ground blinds so I could use the radio to tell the others if I saw any deer headed their way. I got bored as shit and got tired of grinding in Pokemon, so I turned off my game and started rifling through my backpack to find another. As I did this, I heard a strange whooshing sound that sounded very close, but I couldn't find anything. I walked around outside the blind, and as I came around the backside, I saw that the entire outer wall was covered in a mass of fucking interlinked daddy long-leg spiders. I considered running like hell, but I had no idea where the camp was. I had been driven out to the blind. My solution was to use my can of off and the lighter from my backpack to blowtorch all the spiders off. Because stupid, that's why. The plan backfired because I made the mistake of standing downwind of the spiders. The second the fire hit them, they all let go and flew at me. The entire wall of them. Flaming, flying spiders. I immediately started screaming and rolling around on the ground. I took off all of my clothes and immediately phoned my dad on the radio and told him to come get me and that we were going home. I have never sworn or cried so profusely in my life. I eventually went through therapy regarding this event, and now I just hate spiders in general and prefer not to be around them.
When I was about 13 years old, our dog ran away from home. This happened a few times, as the gate in the back was left open due to family members being careless and not ensuring it closed all the way. And she got out, usually not a big deal. The neighborhood we were in was a pretty okay neighborhood, and I could usually find her not that far away sniffing at things, usually in the alleys behind houses, as that's where people set out their trash, etc., etc. She was just curious, and the minute she'd see me, she'd drop whatever she was after and come straight to me. We'd head home, no biggie. This one time it happened, though. I went looking for her and couldn't find her. I started to get a bad feeling and kept looking. Probably a good 6 blocks away, further than she'd ever roamed before, was an area with a bunch of townhomes rental properties. She'd never gone that far before, and I was nearly in tears, ready to give up and go home to wait for her to hopefully find her way back this time instead, as I'd been out probably for almost an hour trying to find her at this point, walking around. When I saw some slight movement behind a wooden fence and thought I heard a yip. In this random person's backyard was my dog. She was muddy and wet, and they'd chained her to a post in the yard. She was pulling at the chain, barking and trying to get to me. It was pretty far away, so I assumed that the people had decided to take her and having seen her running around or something. I knew it was her because she was my dog, damn it, and I knew it was her, and also she had her collar on. I'll never forget what happened next. I rang the doorbell. An older dude, Asian, opened the door after I rang the bell a second time, having given it a good 20 seconds and hearing people inside yelling, talking. Yes, he said, looking at me through a crack in his door. Hi, my name is Absolutalin and I'm here about my dog. I'm so happy you found her and thank you for getting her off the streets. He looked at me suspiciously. What dog? He said, staring at me. What? My dog, the little white dog you have in your backyard, I replied. I was starting to get really creeped out at this point. We have no dog here, he said and tried to close the door on me. That fucker. I stopped the door with my foot. The dog in your backyard, right there. I was getting louder at this point as I was starting to panic a little. I pointed towards his backyard and my dog started to bark frantically. He looked in the direction I was pointing, looked back at me, sort of made a disappointed or annoyed grimace and said, "Oh, that dog," rather unconvincingly. Then he left the doorway. I was totally mystified and more than a little frightened at this point. So I went back around to the yard and was ready to climb over the fence and just take my dog back myself when he came to the patio door of his yard, stepped into the yard with her. She cowered far, far away from him, I noticed, and unchained her from the post, then stepped over and opened his gate. She booked it to me and pretty much leaped into my arms as I kneeled down to meet her, and the old dude just wordlessly walked back inside with a scowl on his face. I have no idea what would have happened if I hadn't wandered out that far to find her, but he didn't seem to have any intention of returning her or calling the pound or anything. Her collar had her license tag information on it, as well as her owner's information on another tag, so his family could have dealt with it, but it didn't seem like they had any intention of doing so. I got the worst feeling from that guy. After that, if she ever got out of the yard again, she was never more than about 50 feet from the house fence boundaries. We even found her waiting patiently outside the gate to the backyard once. TLDR. This guy had either rescued or stolen my dog, tried to deny it, was super shady, and I'll never know why. Edit, accidentally a word. Edit 2. Apparently I used a derogatory term. Apologies.
I used to work as a cleaner at my school after class, so by the time I left, the roads were pretty quiet as everyone had already walked home. One day I noticed this man walking behind me, not too close but obviously following me. He was quite creepy. His face looked like it was made of plastic, and he had a really subtle smile. Anyway, first time I saw him, I thought nothing of it. About 2 weeks later, I noticed him again, and from then on I saw him every single day when I was walking home. I didn't tell anyone because I was 16, and I knew my parents would want to start taking me to and from school, and that's not cool. Anyway, one weekend I was walking to my friend's house, which was a similar route to the one I would take to school. As I was turning up the main road that he would follow me back from school on, I happened to look over at a mini bus that was parked at the bottom on the road, and I swear to God, he was sat in the driver's seat, staring through the windows at me. I called my friend and made it very obvious that I was on the phone thinking it might deter him, but when I next turned around, he was about 2 meters behind me with that same plasticine smile. I started to sort of walk-run, and I could actually hear him doing the same, keeping the same pace and distance the whole time. I was still on the phone to my friend, and I told her to open her front door and wait for me. When I got there, I ran straight in and we locked up the door. The guy just stood outside her house for about 2 hours, smiling and staring in the window. After that, I never saw him again, and I've moved away since. But when I went back to visit my parents last weekend, that mini bus is still there parked in the exact same spot. When I was about 13 or 14, I lived on a farm in NC. This wasn't a regular farm that you would expect with fields full of beans and shit. It was actually a pine tree harvestry. Pine needles are a big landscaping commodity, and so we lived basically in the woods and would bale the pine straw every year. Whatever, the point is that my house was in the middle of 550 acres of perfectly lined longleaf pines. My living room had a huge picture window. I won't go into the architecture of the house, but it was a weird custom job built by some dentist in the 30s. The window in the living room stretched nearly the entire length of the room, maybe 50 feet. The house was built on a subtle hill, so the living room itself sat 5 or 6 feet off the ground, so you had something of an angle to look out at a solid mile of pine trees. During the winter it was unsettling because you'd get just a bit of snow, enough to reflect moonlight so that you could see the dogs running around at night. I'll be honest, I hated that room and that window. So now to the relevant part. I had a cousin over for the weekend, and we were doing what kids do in the country, throwing stuff in the fireplace to see what happens. It is getting late and the fire is dying down, so we build the big kingdom of couch cushions and blankets in the living room and get ready for bed. Nothing out of the ordinary until we hear the dogs barking. They were really far away. The property stretches for nearly a mile, so I just assumed they were chasing off whatever animal felt like shitting in my yard. So my cousin is staring out the window and not saying anything, which prompts the standard, "What's up?" He just kind of keeps staring and says he feels like he's seeing things. Naturally, I get all anxious and start staring out the window as well. Nothing happens for a few minutes and he gets more and more annoyed with me because I'm asking what he saw. He keeps shushing me so that he can focus. And then we both see it. A shadow of a person moves from one tree to the next. Not a run, not a leap, just a brisk walk from one tree to another. This is probably 100 yards out from the house. We can't actually tell if the person is coming closer or not because we're dealing with moonlight reflecting off of snow slush ice. I guess the crazy part is that we didn't so much freak out, because at this point there is still that chance that we didn't see what we saw, you know. So we just kept staring. We should have gone to wake up my dad, but he's an idiot and the kind of guy to walk out on the patio and holler into the woods with his rifle. We were just scared enough to agree that we don't want to taunt whatever is happening. So about 3 minutes later it happens again, but a good 50 feet from where we first saw it. Another person, another tree, a few strides and they were gone. This happened every few minutes for the next half hour, and we just stared. At this point I should mention that I didn't really have neighbors. The land surrounding our farm was federal paper. I don't know who owns it now, so it was miles and miles of uncultivated trees. You don't see people around the farm unless they intend to be there. So we keep watching as these two figures intermittently appear and vanish until finally we see one appear, but not disappear. Instead we focus in on it and see that it is now running forward. We lose our shit and go wake my dad. By the time we get into the room with my half-awake father, there is no one to be seen. We sprint around locking doors and windows. Keep in mind that we're out in the country with no one around. It rarely occurs to lock doors. Every door was worse than the last because you just know that as soon as you reach the door, someone is going to be trying to open it, although that never happened. We locked everything up, walked around the house at least 50 times making sure no one got in without us knowing, and then convinced my dad to fall asleep in the living room with us while we stared out the window. I never understood why my dad wouldn't call the police. He always had this "we take care of our own" mentality, and it simply wasn't an option to call 911. The next day we went out to look and, absolutely, there were footprints everywhere in the snow. We saw them between trees and then we finally saw where someone had been standing right in front of the window. But as I said, I wouldn't have seen them because while I'm 7 feet up in the living room, they would have been right beneath me. A few years ago, there was a small plane accident that occurred in a neighboring town. I was part of the county volunteer search and rescue group, and when we got the call, I was one of the responders to help try and see if there was any chance of a survivor from the crash. We found out from the sheriff that was there that it was an elderly couple and their young granddaughter that were in this plane. Immediately, it went dead silent. You could see the life drain from the other responders' faces as soon as it was said. Upon getting to the area that the crash happened at, it was clear that there would be no survivors from this accident. It wouldn't have a happy ending. There would be no joyful and tear-filled reunion. This plane was absolutely destroyed. Our lead turned to the group and said if anybody was uncomfortable or not willing to do the recovery of the bodies, there would be no hard feelings or anything held against them. Some people just aren't cut out for this. About half of the group said they couldn't do it. They helped set up the rappelling lines, made some radio calls to other teams that were lower on the hillside, helping us navigate through the broken trees and aircraft parts to get to where we expected to find the bodies. I'll never forget the feeling of complete, utter numbness I experienced that day. The first thing any of us saw was this small stuffed teddy bear and the blood that had soaked onto it. When we finally were able to get down to the bodies, we had to stop and collect ourselves. It was heartbreaking to see this little girl with such empty, devoid eyes. She was gone, never to grow up and experience life like most of us had, never to know the joys, aches, frustrations, sadness, excitement, and everything else life throws at you. I've seen a lot in my few years as an EMT. I've seen drug overdoses, diabetic shock, car crashes, suicides of all manners, but this fucked me up for a while. Nobody should have to go through what we went through to help bring closure for the family. Nobody should have to deal with bringing back a child in a body bag. But if I don't stand up and do it, someone else has to bear the heartache, the depression, the numbness. And I don't ever want someone else to experience it like I did. My grandfather's company, does timber mining, was setting up an office in a relatively remote part of a third world county and found a house that was dirt cheap, even for third world country standards. Obviously, there was a catch. The villagers in that area told him not to purchase it since the house was haunted and everyone who had ever lived there died violently. He decided it was just some superstitious BS and got it anyway. So the guy setting up the office will live on the top floor of the house with this family and the lower floors for the office. He moved in with his wife and 3 kids. Anyway, my grandfather suddenly got no news from him for the longest time. Since this was in a remote part of a third world country, he wasn't too worried since he just assumed they lost power or something. He finally contacted the local police to go check on the guy since he was completely unreachable. They found everyone dead. Apparently the guy killed his wife, kids, and then himself with a machete. Yes, not a gun. A fucking machete. He actually hacked himself to death. It wasn't one of those cuts on the wrists to let everyone slowly bleed to death. Everyone was hacked down, including the guy himself. The description of the scene had to be an exaggeration since I'm assuming the sight of 5 decapitated bodies, including 3 kids, were scary enough to make people see things. So I won't bother putting it here since I'm not sure what's true and there were details that people could not have witnessed. Let's just say I stopped paying attention after I heard the phrase, magic machete. I was told entire room was covered in blood, including the ceiling. Some people were saying the blood on the ceiling had to have gotten there because the spirits threw the bodies around. I had to explain about blood pressure and got tons of weird looks. Now, the weird part, if this isn't weird enough, was that he managed to barricade the door with the bed, with his wife and kids on it. And it's one of those gigantic old beds that's extremely hard to move. The locals say this is evidence he was possessed by spirits. I say moving to the middle of nowhere in some third world country drove the guy nuts, and crazy people can do all sorts of crazy shit and even perform crazy feats of strength. Anyway, my grandfather had to pay a few bribes to make sure nothing gets to the press, not hard, middle of nowhere, about the entire thing, and get the police to classify the deaths as natural. No idea how they'll explain that third world countries are awesome. All employees in the know had to sign an NDA too. He then tried getting other volunteers to set up the office. Even if they haven't heard all the gory details because of my grandfather's gag order, everyone knew the previous guy died. No one volunteered. He promoted one guy, gave him a fancy title and told him he's in charge of setting up that office. The guy quit. I was 16 and woke up in the middle of the night to seeing my clothes being rustled about in my doorway. After washing my clothes, I like to hang dry them on my door frame. I notice some really gray, veiny-looking legs, and then I see these really long, pointed sticks moving through my clothes. It took me a second, but my sleepy eyes adjusted to see one of the most grotesque demon-looking motherfuckers I have ever seen. He was extremely skinny and had a distended stomach. His skin was gray and veiny, and those long sticks were his fingers. His chin was long, his eyes had no lids on them and were unusually big. His tiny mouth was in a pucker and moved like he was eating an imaginary lollipop. His hunchback looked as though it tore out of the strange hospital gown he was wearing. He just stared at me, and I tried to scream my grandmother awake, who was sharing a room with me for the weekend. He wouldn't stop staring, and I stared back and tried to shake my grandmother awake. I started noticing other things about him, like how large and cone-like his head was and how hairless and shriveled he looked as he stood still, surprised I could see him. My grandmother woke up, looked towards the door, and he was gone. In the weeks leading to this encounter, I had been experiencing strange things in my house, like my bedroom door slamming and locking on its own. One night I woke up to what felt like several hands touching my feet and legs, and horrible nightmares. After the experience with this strange gray man, I told my parents, and they had my room exorcised. If an exorcism really made those horrible things stop, or gave me peace of mind from things I was manifesting myself. All I know is I don't experience those things anymore, and I'll never sleep with a door open again. TL, doctor. I saw a demon who was surprised I could see him and had to exorcise my room. Not sure if real or I manifested it in my stressed out teenage brain.